Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I mentioned in my update video that I would be posting some behind the scenes stuff related to my movies and projects, both previous and current, if I felt there was enough to say. I'll also be uploading some audio commentaries for some of my older projects, if I feel like there's some interesting insight as to my mindset behind making them, and so on and so forth, if that's what you're interested in. Well, I figured now would be a good time to finally get on that by discussing my thought process and the making of the 2 VR programs I uploaded to the channel. And when I say the 2 VR programs I uploaded, I really do mean just the 2. I will show bits and pieces of some of the other ones I worked on, but only if there's something very specific I need to demonstrate. Otherwise, it will be just the VR Stealth and the Brain VR. With that out of the way, let's begin. But first, January 2021. The pandemic was still going and classes over Zoom were still in effect. At this point, I was in my second semester of college, and one of the classes I had to take in order to graduate was psychology. The professor was a woman named Kimberly Glacken. Just stick with me, there's a reason I'm bringing this up. In class, she was always very involved with the students. Before every lecture, she would always ask how we've been, what our hobbies were, how we got into our hobbies, etc. Well, when it came to me, I was known as the movie guy in class. Every time I talked about myself or my hobbies, it was always centered around movies. Whether it be movies I made, movies I liked, movies I didn't like, and you get the idea. Even though I'm sure all my classmates got tired of hearing me rambling about films, Kim was always very fascinated. Fast forward a few months later to August. Schools were now allowing in-person classes as long as everyone followed safety protocol. About a week or two in, I figured, hey, why not? And I dropped by to give Kim a little visit. This is where everything starts to fall into place. We sat together in her office for about an hour and had a conversation about how our summers went and things like that. During this conversation, she asked me if I was still making movies. I said yes, and she gave me a quick rundown. She explained to me that the community college I was attending at the time was trying to incorporate virtual reality into teaching and learning. They figured that by having students actually interacting with the lessons themselves through the use of VR, that they would be more inclined to learn. Part of that involved creating virtual reality programs using a 360 camera and special editing software meant for that kind of stuff. And since I had years of experience under my belt, she figured it would be good for me to have a job involving filming and editing, which would look really good on my resume. She asked me if I would be interested in being her work study and work on VR. Naturally, I said yes. Before I could create any virtual reality programs of my own, I had to test out the professionally made programs that were already installed on the computer. After all, professors were going to be using these, so it helped to know which programs were good and which ones were bad. From October 2021 all the way to February 2022, I was in that lab by myself testing each and every VR program we had. We tried getting me an assistant to help this process go by faster, but that never happened. After testing 84 programs and after taking 178 pages of notes, I was finally done testing all of the installed VR programs. Some were really fun, others were really frustrating, and others were just really boring. One of the best programs I tested was Kokoda VR. Now, this footage was captured by somebody else, obviously, but it's the same program. In this one, you play as an Australian soldier during World War II as you travel down the Kokoda Trail, a trail that was actually very pivotal in the Australians gaining victory over the Japanese. You travel from one setting to the next, all while collecting items, watching your fellow soldiers engaging in battle, and watching video clips about Kokoda and the real-life soldiers involved. The reason I bring this up is because these were the kinds of programs that I found myself the most drawn to. The ones that felt like actual interactive video games while also teaching you stuff as you played. I really liked the ones that found a perfect balance between fun immersion and education. With that in mind, this would be the standard I would try to use when creating my own virtual reality programs. Now that we're into the actual creation process, let's run down what I used and how I did everything. Namely, the camera. Don't worry, I won't get too technical on you guys. Trust me, I don't want to bore you to death. I'll just discuss the camera and the controls here, and in the next section, I'll get into the editing side. Sound cool? Cool. The camera I used was something similar to this, a camera that resembled a small monolith with a lens on each side. Each lens would film a 180-degree fisheye view, and when put together, this is what gave the footage a 360-degree view. Given how the idea was to make students feel like they were physically there in whatever setting was being filmed, this was perfect. However, there were also a few setbacks when using this camera. Usually when filming, especially by yourself, there's quite a bit of fluff that gets recorded along with the footage you want to capture, specifically setting up and stopping the camera. Here, it was no exception. I would press record, move out of the way or get into position, film what I needed to film, and then stop recording. I figured what I could do was record what I could with the mistakes left in, go into my editing software, trim out all the parts I didn't want the player to see, and then use that. Seems simple, right? Well, no. If I put the footage into my editing software and tweaked it at all, the finished product would look like this. The footage would turn into more of a stationary panoramic shot. This meant that now players would not be able to view it in 360 as originally intended. If I wanted to keep the footage as virtual, the player would have to witness me setting the camera up and shutting it off, breaking the immersion. Great. Thankfully though, the camera came with instructions that also promoted an app. With the app, you could connect the camera to your phone via Bluetooth and use your phone to press record. So if you wanted to get a clean shot where you didn't have to record yourself setting things up, you could simply put your phone in your pocket and press record from a distance and the 360 camera would start up. This greatly helped in trying to make the VR programs feel more immersive for the players. Even though I was able to fix that problem, I still couldn't edit. If I messed up in any way, I would have to stop the recording and try again until I got it right in one take. But this problem would also be fixed when I focused more on creating programs where the player is by themselves and I only appeared as a voiceover. For example, in this shot, I'm actually standing outside the door with my phone in hand, counting down how long I wanted the recording to last. Really quickly before we move on, let's talk about how things would have operated. If you hadn't noticed in this footage, there's a little white bar that seems to be cut off. Well, that's because the original screen recording looked like this. It looked like a pair of binoculars. This is because when these programs were finished, they were going to be used by students on their phones. This is how it would have worked. You would have loaded up the VR program I made on your phone, then placed your phone in these little miniature headsets. You would unhook the strap from the top, place your phone screen right against the front so that it was facing inwards, and then rehook the strap. Then you would have had your own tiny VR headset to use in class. To play around with the different settings, you would simply move your head around and point the little white dot in the center of the screen at whatever it was you wanted to click on. I made a few basic programs just to test the capabilities of the camera, as well as ThingLink, the editing software I use to link all the footage. Once I felt comfortable enough using the camera and ThingLink, I thought I could finally branch off and create a real, genuine attempt at a virtual reality experience. After my first few attempts, Kim came to me and said that we needed a VR program that walked students through the VR lab itself. Basically, all I had to do was create an experience that taught students about the equipment and how to use them. Simple enough. I wrote out a script, set everything up, and I created a VR experience where I'm on camera and physically explaining what each thing in the VR lab was for. This here is the VR headset. This is how students will be able to experience the VR programs needed for teaching. It was fine, but I felt like I could do a lot more. Well, it just so happens that the idea wasn't very hard to come up with at all. At the time, I had just started my journey of playing every single Metal Gear game, since I hadn't up until that point. For those who don't know, Metal Gear is a game series centered around stealth, sneaking around facilities or other locations and partaking in espionage, all while trying not to get caught. Since I still had Metal Gear on the mind and we were dealing with a lab filled with all this fancy equipment, I figured, why not make this a stealth game? And thus, Operation VR was born. In this version, you play as a secret operative tasked with sneaking into a virtual lab to uncover secrets of a nefarious VR creator. And as you would sneak around, you would learn about the different VR equipment. This was my excuse to make the program feel more like a game while also incorporating learning. I think I did okay for the most part, but I will admit I did take a little too long in the beginning, specifically where I'm giving the player all this exposition. However, because this was treated more as a tutorial, I think I can give myself a break. That said, there is one part I put that needs some further explanation. Whenever you see a phone icon, Always open it first before anything else. These icons will allow me to pass along important information to you. If you bypass these icons, you'll miss information and you won't be able to go back. The reason I said that the player must click on the voiceover first was because this was my way of forcing the player to actually take their time and learn stuff. If they bypassed what they were supposed to learn, they would have no way of going back. Let me explain. In ThingLink, you can link different videos together by creating tours. When you create a tour, you are given the option to select the destination that you want to go to. Here, you can select whatever video or image you want the destination to be. When it's all set up, you click on it and it will take you to the destination you created. Not only can you create a destination to a new clip, but you can also create a destination to a clip you've already been to. And you can have as many as you want, sometimes to your own detriment. Here is the layout of another program I did for a tour of the college campus. It's a mess. With Operation VR, I tried to create something that felt more straightforward for the students to use. Because of that, I wanted to make sure that the students actually took their time and explored every single thing in the destination before moving on. Speaking of, these were also very simple to do. Back in ThingLink, you can add a tag, specifically text and media. Here you can add a picture or video, text, and even audio if you so choose, much like what I did with Operation VR. And because the audio recording was done separately, I could edit it as many times as I needed until it sounded right. You'll need a password to unlock the contents of that laptop. Try searching the room to find a possible code. Overall, while not perfect, I think this one came out okay. Now we move on from a slightly complicated but interesting experience to a much more simple and strictly educational one. With this one, Kim told me she needed a VR program that talked about the different parts and functions of the brain. Granted, some of the programs I tested had this, but she wanted a much more simplified version for beginners. So, yeah, fair enough. For this one, the setup was very basic. Take a plastic brain, set it up on a tripod in a science class, set up the camera, hide behind one of the tables to be out of view, and record the brain from multiple different angles to display each part. When it came to scripting, Kim was a major help. She gave me a list of all the things she wanted to be discussed, and she also fact-checked any information I wrote to make sure everything sounded right. The whole goal behind this was so that students could hear a more abridged version narrated by me, and the professors could elaborate more on what I said to better help the students understand. Kim wanted it done like this because even though she asked for it so she could use it in her psychology class, she also wanted it to be used for biology classes as well. In case a biology professor wanted to focus more on the scientific aspects of the brain, they could still bounce off my simplified narration and elaborate in their own way. A multi-purpose program, if you will. After the Brain VR, I would work on just 2 more VR experiences, an updated tour of the campus, and one about heuristics. After that, I would eventually transfer to a university, which I am currently attending. I don't go to that community college anymore, which meant I couldn't keep my job as a work-study either. Kim and I discussed trying to keep me hired as a part-time employee, but it never came to be. Even though these projects were meant to be more as educational video games, this was still quite an experience in terms of film. I learned how to use a new kind of camera, I learned how to edit new kinds of footage, I got to write, direct, do voiceover, and all while being paid to do what I love doing. Not only that, but it also helped relight my creative spark for filmmaking. Around that time, I had been in a spot where I couldn't really bring myself to do any film-related stuff. After working on Bill in mid-2020 during the pandemic, I was kind of done at that point, mainly because life was getting mentally exhausting. Adjusting to a college life, working 2 jobs that really didn't do me any favors given how people behaved during this time period, moving houses and dealing with relationships, it was all just exhausting. By the time I would sit down and try to come up with a new film idea, I would feel too burnt out. I would have fewer and fewer ideas, and if I had an idea, I wouldn't have the motivation to go all the way with it. That's part of the reason why I had no new movies in 2021. Everything else around me was so mentally draining that I just couldn't find it in me for a while to work on anything new. When I was hired to film and make VR experiences, it made me feel good. It made me realize just how much I missed making movies and being able to create projects that I enjoyed. Shortly after I started making these, I had my creative spark once again. I was able to come up with all these new ideas for possible short films, and I was writing draft after draft for all these different scripts. And honestly, I don't think that spark would have come back as soon as it did had Kim not offered me the chance to be her work study and do all this stuff. And for that, I will always be thankful to have worked alongside her and had this experience. I hope you all got something out of this video, and I hope you learned a thing or two about the process I had to go through. Because I know I sure did.